My name is Miriam Gensowski. I'm an assistant professor of economics at the University of Copenhagen. The motivation behind my research is to understand the drivers and determinants of inequality. And the lens that I tend to use to look at questions of inequality is human capital, notably multidimensional human capital. So I look at questions of inequality through the human capital perspective. And when I say inequality, I mean both intergenerational inequality as well as interpersonal inequality. So in the interpersonal questions, I've studied, for example, how skills, multidimensional skills, influence lifetime earnings. Well, I've found that conscientiousness or extroversion influence lifetime earnings on the same order of magnitude as educational attainment. So they have very strong influences. And what I found even more fascinating is that these effects of socio-emotional skills on labor market outcomes are even larger for individuals who have higher education. So in that sense, these skills have an influence on the return to education. We also find in using different data that skills influence wealth and income. And this holds up even when we control for family background, for example. So when we use a twin setup where we compare twins with different traits and observe their outcomes. So these findings are pretty robust and influential. In a different line of research that involves several co-authors and different papers, we are taking this perspective a step further, and we're saying, okay, we know that skills influence choices and outcomes, but what happens when we bring in the parental generation? So we say, let's study occupational and educational choices and understand how skills influence these, but then conditional on that, A, is there a role for the parental background? So is there a remaining dependence between fathers and their sons, for example, when it comes to choosing occupations? And B, are there some skills that can promote mobility, so that reduce the dependence of sons from their father's occupation, for example? To find out whether there is a remaining role of parents in these choices, we have to study occupation and education jointly. When we do that, we find that they influence each other. So me trying to pick a job in the future influences what kind of education I will want to get, because the two will jointly determine how much I will earn and how happy I am with those choices. And that opens up a possibility of a dependence in occupations that runs across generations. So me trying to pick a job that is similar to my father, driving educational attainment, because the two choices are so inherently linked. And we find that there is sorting into occupations by comparative advantage. So I tend to choose occupations that use the skills that I possess. But at the same time, there is also this intergenerational dependence where I tend to choose a job that resembles that of my father. And that could introduce a role for educational attainment that we have not previously considered. Studying skills can be a pretty data-driven business. I think the field has generally benefited a lot from surveys of socio-emotional skills, for example, or other non-traditional measures being included into existing panel data sets to allow economists to study these topics with secondary data sources. Another trend has been the increasing use and linkage of administrative data, so public registers that are available. And I believe that the next step for us is to combine these two trends and add custom-made surveys to administrative data sets. So I work in Denmark, which is one of the Scandinavian countries that is well known for very rich public registers of the full population. And so that's why I feel like there is a lot of potential there. I've been involved in a project that assesses school children and asks them to self-assess their own competencies in terms of academic skills, but also socio-emotional skills and soft skills. And this can be used and linked to the registers on, for example, parents and their education, their outcomes, as well as to academic achievement of the children. And so I think this is very promising to study the causes and consequences of inequality.